Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. My name is Tyler, and today, folks, we're going to talk about the Orioles pitching. I'm coming to you on the day after the Orioles almost have a perfect game with Brandon Young. He goes through 7 2/3 perfect, has the dribbler from Ramon Urias that he kind of misplays. He probably could have set his feet, made the play, would have been perfect through 8 innings. Maybe he comes back for the ninth, and we see if he makes history as the first Orioles pitcher ever to throw a perfect game. That would have been pretty awesome. It just didn't happen. We'll talk about where Brandon Young fits in the Orioles pitching staff going into 2026 because I think his role is up in the air a little bit. I think the whole pitching staff is up in the air a little bit, but I think that's one of the things that's most crucial that Mike Elias has to nail this offseason. And I think we've got some things we need to learn about the Orioles in this last, 6 weeks that's left in the season, both from, who's currently pitching in the rotation, who's going to be coming back to pitching in the rotation. So I want to spend most of this episode, and again, I don't think it's going to be a very long one, just talking about the Orioles pitching staff, specifically the starters, because I think the bullpen is a whole nother, you know, can of worms that we can get into at some point. I think the Orioles are clearly having basically open auditions for the bullpen, especially with Felix Bautista out. I think we're seeing a lot of Cade Stroud, a lot of Grant Wolfram and others, Yarmil Geraldo. But I think what I want to talk about today is mostly going to be the starting rotation because that is the area where the Orioles just spectacularly failed in the most dramatic fashion this season. If Charlie Morton had been better to start the year, if he'd been more like his form from, June and July, would the Orioles be in the wild card race? Same kind of goes for Kyle Gibson. If Kyle Gibson had just been like pitched to his career averages or maybe even a little bit worse than that. Maybe the Orioles win a couple more games and again, they might be in the thick of the wild card race because they've played pretty well since then. They had a winning month in June. July they were a game above 500. Now in August so far they're one game under 500 despite selling off, Laureano who's going off with the Padres, Ryan O'Hearn, Cedric Mullins, all the bullpen arms pretty much. The Orioles could be in a pretty different spot right now. So I think the rotation is what I'm going to focus on, and it should be, I think, theoretically the biggest focus for Mike Elias in the offseason ahead. So speaking of the rotation, the reason this kind of came to my mind was this question that I'm going to steal from Candid Chat. Mark, the head of the website over there, posted a question, just would you bring back Zach Eflin, as a question to like the group, the readers on Camden Chat. And I find that really interesting because Zach Eflin's kind of a name that, you know, I think coming into the season, we sort of viewed as maybe he's a qualifying offer candidate. Maybe he's a multi-year extension guy. Like, no, he's not like going to be your ace or anything, but you can depend on Zach Eflin to be a pretty, competent mid-rotation kind of guy. And is that worth $18 million a year? Is that worth $20 million a year for 3 years or something like that? Now you don't have to think about that spot for a while, but Eflin's obviously had a very different season than we anticipated. And I think now that the conversation has kind of shifted a little bit on him. So that was sort of the reason I wanted to focus on this was that question kind of just brought to mind like, yeah, the whole rotation is sort of up in the air right now. So let's talk about the rotation. Let's set a base real quick about where the rotation exists right now. So as I record this, the Orioles rotation is pretty much as follows, although this positioning I don't think is quite right on Fangraphs, but we'll go with it. Trevor Rogers, Tomoyuki Sagano, Brandon Young, Cade Povich, Dean Kramer is 1 through 5. I think more seriously, if you're thinking about it, it's like Trevor Rogers is the 1, Dean Kramer is the 2, Sagano is the 3, Povich is the 4, and Young is the 5. But just this is the current order that they stack up in just from injuries and trades and who made sense. But those are the 5. We know Kyle Bradish is coming back soon. We know Tyler Wells is coming back soon. They're both coming back as starters. I know Tyler Wells has been a reliever in the past, and I think eventually the Orioles want to get him back into the bullpen, but for now he is a starter. I think they're both going to come back into the rotation. When they come in, I think Brandon Young is going to not be part of this rotation anymore, which is unfortunate. He pitched really well against the Astros here, but in general has been struggled a little bit, and I think could do with some less exposure. Maybe you put him in the bullpen, let him take a multi-inning role or something like that, and then maybe the Orioles go with a six-man rotation because then you're going to be getting close to rosters expanding, and my expectation is they add one pitcher, one hitter. Dylan Beavers, I think, will be up before rosters expand in September. So I think he'll already be on the roster, and then maybe Samuel Basayo comes up as the hitter. So you have both Beavers and Basayo up, and then you probably add a bullpen piece of some kind to give you that extra length. So then you can have a six-man rotation to get everybody kind of an extra day of rest, protect some guys. You don't want to overexpose Trevor Rogers or Povich or even Bradish. You want Bradish to be able to go like 5 or 6 and then get 5 or 6 days off. So that's, the current setup of Rogers, Sagano, Young, Povich, Kramer. I think Bradish comes back, Wells comes back, Young goes out, then you have a six-man rotation. Then going into next year, Sagano I expect to be gone. So then you have Rogers, Bradish, um, Wells, Povich, Kramer, Young, McDermott, I think factors into it in the offseason. Let's see who else we've got in AAA right now to kind of, consider in here. Trey Gibson at some point next year. Um, there's a couple other guys. I think, if Roansy Contreras comes back, he could be in the mix. Luis Castillo. These are more obviously depth types of guys in the mix there. And I'm not sure we've got anybody else really worth kind of thinking about. There are some interesting prospects, but I don't think you view them as like opening day rotation pieces. The only other one I think you have to, think about is Grayson Rodriguez. Obviously on the IL right now, out for the year, had the elbow cleanup surgery, but not Tommy John. And you have to expect him to be back at some point next year. Albert Suarez, another one on the IL, shoulder inflammation. It sounds like he'll get back this year, but I don't know. And I don't know what you expect from him next year. I think, again, he's sort of in the same bucket as Wells. I think the Orioles ideally want him to be in the bullpen where he can be a multi-inning guy versus in the rotation. He kind of got, pushed into that last year, did really, really well, kind of one of the unsung heroes of the season, but I think he gets overexposed there. So going into next year, can you count on Suarez? Can you count on Rodriguez? Can you count on Wells? Can you count on Bradish? Like, there's a lot of questions. Can you count on Eflin if you want to bring him back? Like, all of your guys are coming back with a lot of injury concerns. You pretty much only go into it feeling decent about Rogers, I think. And even that has like questions because, yeah, he's been really, really good for, 2 months now, but he had the injury stuff. He was really bad last year. Has not really been good since his rookie year in general. So do you feel good coming back and saying, like, yeah, Trevor Rogers is our ace? I don't think so. So that's the current situation. We know Rogers will be back. We know Bradish will be back as far as, legitimate every single day, front rotation type of guys that if healthy, you feel good about. Kramer comes back as sort of your workhorse. All of a sudden, Kramer just goes 6 or 7 innings every time out now. That's awesome. And then beyond that, I think mostly what you have internally is depth stuff. It's Brendan Young, it's Cade Povich, it's like I said, Chase McDermott if he's healthy, Tyler Wells if he's healthy, Albert Suarez if he's healthy. So you don't have a lot there guaranteed beyond Bradish, Rogers, and Kramer. So that brings about the question of Zach Eflin. What do you do with Zach Eflin? Let's talk about Zach Eflin a little bit. So Eflin had back stuff, has struggled this year. And when he hasn't struggled, he's been on the IL. And he has this back surgery. He says it's been bothering him for, I think, 5 or 6 years, he said. But then also says he'd love to be back with the Orioles next year. Now, of course, what's he gonna say? You're still an Oriole right now. They're still, signing your paychecks for a couple more weeks here. Of course, you want to be back with the Orioles. What else are you gonna say? And he says a quote in here. He goes, "I feel like I owed this team a lot more than I gave them, but at the end of the day, I've got to take care of my back. I've got to get something done. I've got to get it healthy again and show up next year ready to go," which is totally a defensible thing. He waited till post trade deadline. He tried to stay available to be like a trade candidate. He tried to stay available while the team was still theoretically in contention. He did all the things I think you want him to do for a guy that's injured and trying to work through it. So really no ill will towards Zach Eflin. Just a season that hasn't gone well for him, hasn't played well, has been hurt, and it just really sucks. And it sucks for him too because he's not going to I don't think he's going to go get a multi-year contract right now. This is a guy that has obviously been really durable in his career and played really well. But didn't have the exact contract kind of year you want to have. So what can he expect going out there? Well, I think you take um the the qualifying offer off the table entirely because that's like $22 million. I'm not signing Zach Eflin, a guy that's made, pitched half a season, had back injuries, didn't play well when he was pitching. Velocity seemed down, strikeouts were down. I'm not giving that guy $22 million. Like, sorry. And especially if it impacts other moves I'm going to make. I've already said I would like the Orioles to go get a front rotation kind of guy. Zach Eflin's not that. And for $22 million, like that's not going to happen. I think you can consider Zach Eflin on a 1 year kind of prove it deal, or even like if he would sign one of those like 1 year and then a team option or a mutual option or something. Mutual option is always worthless because when are the two sides going to agree that they want to come back on that type of deal? That rarely ever happens. But something like that, I think, could be in the cards there for Eflin. Now, how much could he make? I don't know. He made $18 million this year. I don't see him going and getting $18 million again next year. given the season that he's come off. He doesn't have the reputation of a Walker Buehler, um, where he got a lot of money from the Red Sox this year, and I mean he struggled too, so that didn't work out for them either. The Red Sox have been good, but Bueller's been kind of bad. I don't know that he's going to get $18 million, but maybe like 12 to 15, somewhere in that range for a 1 year deal to kind of prove it. That feels palatable for me if you're the Orioles, because the rest of the rotation is pretty cheap right now. Rogers pre-arb, or not pre-arb. Rogers in the final year of arbitration still will get a nice raise, but not going to be crazy. Bradish, I think, is first year of arbitration and was hurt this year, so I don't think he's going to be too crazy. Then you got Kramer's arbitration, but again, he's more of an average big league pitcher. He won't cost that much. Cade Povich is pre-arbitration. Brendan Young's pre-arbitration. All your depth guys are pre-arbitration. So there's room there to give Eflin $12 to $15 million for 1 year as sort of your prove it contract in the rotation, because I think the Orioles do need to go get one of those guys. They need to go get a veteran on a 1 year deal. If you feel confident in Zach Eflin that he can bounce back, give it to Zach Eflin. If not Eflin, then I think you need to look somewhere in the league at like a Zach Gallen, who Zach Gallen's going to cost more because he stayed healthy, has a more upside, I think, than Eflin, has shown more upside than Eflin, but struggled this season, obviously, in Arizona. But I think Gallen could take a 1 year deal. Could be more like a 20 million, could be more like a Walker Buehler type 1 year deal. So there's that to think about. But they need one of those guys in, I think, what you consider like the middle of the rotation. If you say, Rogers, Bradish is sort of your top of the rotation, I think they need to add a veteran like an Eflin, like a Gallen, who is looking to prove something in a 1 year deal that they can go back on the market next year, the following year rather, and go get 3 years, 75 million, or 4 years, 80 or 90 million, or something like that. The Orioles need to go get one of those guys, because that's sort of the market they exist in. Is we can give you opportunities, we can pay you enough, and you can then go back out there next year and get another bite at the apple. I think the Orioles can exist in that market. I would love to also see them get a more front of the rotation arm that you could put, maybe not necessarily in front of Rogers and Bradish, but maybe in between them, or sort of be in that mix, the number one, the number two type. That I think you go get via trade. And I think look, you did this July of a big old draft class. You went and got an extra draft pick. You wanted to bulk up the minors, the back of the minors, the bottom of the minors in a big way. You did that. Irish, Bodine, Eloy, Slater. You got all these guys that I think you feel really, really good about as your youngsters, as the next wave. That's great. The deadline, you focused on depth, because the pieces you had to trade weren't huge pieces. I mean, I think the biggest pieces you moved was probably Laureano, O'Hearn. They went in the same deal. You got a lot of interesting pieces back from San Diego in that deal, but a lot of them are pitchers, depth type pieces. You didn't get a ton of huge upside. I think Bateman's probably the one people think is the most interesting. He's a younger pitcher, but a lot of your other guys are double A types who I think seem to be viewed as a ceiling of 4 or 5 type, a swingman type, middle reliever type, which is great. That's still valuable in a trade, which is exactly where I think they should be used. Is you went and got all these guys as sort of upper minors fluff. Maybe you package those guys with a younger guy plus a major leaguer, whatever, and you go get a big time starter. Now who that is exactly right now, I'm not so sure. That market tends to develop throughout the offseason, or you look at the teams that are trying to rebuild and maybe have a starter 2 or 3 years away from free agency, and they'd be willing to make a trade. I don't think the Orioles are going to get into like the Paul Skeens type of situation where he's, next year's his final year of pre-arbitration. He's got 4 years of team control. He's going to cost an arm and a leg. I don't think the Orioles are going to be playing in that depth of the pool, but I do think that's the type of pitcher they need to go for, who has maybe 2 years of team control, 1 year of team control, who the Orioles can, feel okay about giving up their prospects for. That's kind of what they did with Corbin Burns. They went Joey Ortiz, DL Hall for 1 year of Corbin Burns. That was a deal that worked out well for everybody. That's the type of moves that I think the Orioles should be making. If you look at potential free agents, the Orioles can also, get into that as well, but that always feels like not a Mike Elias type move. There's Framber Valdez. Who else we got? We have got Ranger Suarez, 2 lefties. Michael King, I really like him, but has had some injury stuff this year. Not talking about bullpen again. There's a lot of bullpen arms that are interesting. Zach Gallen, I think, would be a perfect addition as like sort of that 1 year prove it. Merrill Kelly, not really an ace type, but a good, solid, above average pitcher. Maybe you can get him for the right kind of deal. He's older. They always love to get older pitchers. He would probably do a 2 or 3 year deal for, 20 mil a year, which is risky, but you could do it. So those are kind of like the bigger names on the free agent market. I think a lot of people are eyeing Valdez right now. He's a guy that's pitched really well this year. Orioles knocked him around yesterday, but has pitched in the playoffs a whole bunch. Older, left-handed, you know, sort of a proven veteran type. That wouldn't be a bad move. Ranger Suarez is an interesting one, more of a soft tosser, but really dependable. And again, pitched in a lot of playoff games. He's a little bit younger than Valdez, so there's some interest there. But it's just, are the Orioles going to do that? Are they going to sign these guys that are going to get qualifying offers? They're going to have to give up a draft pick for it. Dylan Cease is on here. He's a guy that maybe the Padres won't QO him because he didn't really pitch that great this year. He could come back for 20 some mil on 1 year deal to prove it. Like there's those aspects you need to think about too. I'm not so sure. Will they do those things? Will they not? Because I think for the Orioles, mostly the QO, Mike Elias doesn't feel like he wants to do the QO stuff. I think more he would rather trade for a player that you can then QO yourself, and then you feel like, oh, I'm giving up a prospect, 3 prospects or whatever, but I'm getting this player back. I can then QO them, get a prospect back essentially. So I'm really only trading 2 prospects for this pitcher. I can swallow that versus I'm giving up money plus a prospect for a pitcher. Like that's a lot to handle, and that doesn't feel like something that Mike Elias is comfortable with. So I think look out for that in terms of the free agents. If there's a guy that doesn't get QO'd, Merrill Kelly could kind of fit into that mold there of a dependable sort of mid-rotation guy, older, that would fit there. But I think more often if they're gonna do the free agent moves, I think the Orioles are gonna do like a Zach Gallen type of deal where probably doesn't get the QO because he struggled this year. I don't think the Diamondbacks want to give him 20 some $1 million when they're already paying Corbin Burns a lot of money. They're paying, I think, Eduardo Rodriguez. Jordan Montgomery might be off the books now after this year, but you get the picture. They're paying a lot for starters right now. And do you want to give Zach Gallen that when you're kind of getting out of him at maybe the right time? But I could see the Orioles giving him 15 million, $18 million for 1 year to maybe prove it to get your big deal next year. You could bring back Zach Eflin instead on that 1 year deal. And then at the top of the rotation, I think they're probably going to make a trade for somebody. Package 2 or 3 prospects together for a guy that's 1 or 2 years away from free agency. Then you can feel better about it. And hopefully there was a quick edit here, but I wanted to insert some potential names here. And I think if you're thinking about starters that could be on the move, I think you want to look at the Minnesota Twins. Obviously, the Minnesota Twins traded away a lot of guys at the deadline. Doesn't feel like they're planning to compete in 2026. Maybe I'm wrong. The Central is a unique beast that I feel like every team thinks they can compete year to year, unless you're the White Sox. But Joe Ryan, Pablo Lopez, 2 starters that have contracts that go beyond 2026 that I think the Orioles could view favorably. Again, they're going to be expensive in terms of prospects, but if you want to compete, if you want to have those guys for more than a year, those feel like prime targets for me. And then also the Marlins as well. The Marlins are always looking to move names. The Marlins are always kind of in a perpetual state of like semi rebuild, but also compete. I'm not sure where they're going right now. They're pretty competent this year. They're about a 500 team. They're better than the Orioles have been. They obviously have Kyle Stowers, who's been fantastic. If they believe in him as a future building block, I don't think you want to sell, but at the same time, they have pitchers that are interesting. Sandy Alcantara, Edward Cabrera, that have been talked about as, people that could be moved for a while now. Obviously, Alcantara hasn't been very good this year, but has a pedigree of being a really competent pitcher that, again, I don't know, you feel like you get Alcantara and you go, oh, we solved our ace problem because he's had issues this year. But it's an interesting thing to at least think about that if the value is there, I could see the Orioles doing that because they definitely need a guy with pedigree, I think, to kind of push things forward there. And I would feel pretty good about that. If the Orioles can get a trade like an Alcantara or a Cabrera, you have Rogers, Bradish, you have Kramer as sort of an innings eater. You get a veteran on a 1 year deal like an Eflin, like a Gallen. Then you have depth of Povich and Young and McDermott and Trey Gibson when he's ready, because they're going to need all these guys. Guys are going to get hurt. You're going to have to give guys time off. It just is part of the game now. And the Orioles need more pitching, and they need to take bigger swings. They went the conservative route this past offseason with Sagano, and Morton, and it didn't work. They didn't have the upside. They knew Bradish was hurt already. They knew Rodriguez had injury stuff. Like it was a risky thing to do, and they failed. And I think they need to take bigger chances with bigger upside in 2026. Because look, Mike Elias, if the Orioles don't make the playoffs again next year, he's gonna be fired. He just is. That's the reality of it. Or at least he should be. I guess I shouldn't say I know that for a fact, but he should be fired if the Orioles don't make the playoffs next year because you're just wasting away this core. And that's great. You've built a pipeline of talent, yada yada yada. Fans want to go to the playoffs. They want to have an exciting product, and it hasn't been very interesting this year. Especially, April and May sucked, and I get the team's been better than that, but it sunk the entire season. That even if they were like mediocre, the Orioles would be in the playoff race right now. They might be in the playoffs right now, like in a wild card spot because they'd be 3, 4, 5 games above 500 if they just went 500 in those months, whatever 3 months ago. It just really sunk the season because the pitching staff just was not up to snuff early on, and they had nowhere to turn. They had to keep going to Morton. They had to bring Gibson out a couple times. It just they had nowhere to turn. They painted themselves into a corner with no option. They need to give themselves more options. They need to give themselves more upside. And I think some of these moves I've lined out, maybe not these specifically, but that type of a deal where you feel okay with the structure you've got in place. You treat Rodriguez as a bonus. You go trade for somebody that's got a year or two of control that you feel is like a 1 or 2 or 3. You add a veteran on a 1 year deal like an Eflin, like a Gallon, who you think, yeah, maybe we overpay them for a year, but we somewhat know what to expect from them, and they have an upside of being much better than what we're paying them. And then yeah, they go, but we probably can QO them at that point. We can QO Gallon or we can QO Eflin next year if we give them a little bit more right now. And I think there's some value in that. So that's what I think. Leave your comments either on YouTube or on Spotify or on our spot or what did I say? Yeah, Spotify, YouTube, or on social media is what I meant to say at the Warehouse Pod. Reach out to us there and let us know what you think. Would you bring Gallon back? If not Gallon, what moves would you make? Interested to hear what you think. And yeah, just get involved with us. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or even on YouTube. It's all free. It just gets us in your feed and lets us, grow our numbers a little bit. So we'd really appreciate that. That's all I've got for this episode. Jesse, I think, will be back next. Not sure what his topic is going to be, but subscribe to the feed now if you want to get that in your inboxes next. And yeah, just thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate it. Like I said at the top, my name is Tyler, and this has been the Warehouse Podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. And we'll check you next time. See you.